So when the pastors James and Andrew go away, you get Jesse leading you in the service, and you get Richard preaching at you. Okay. So we hope that it's not too bad and that everybody will be okay when all is said and done. A big hi to everybody watching out there in live stream, online. You're welcome. We're glad that you're here. Happy New Year. A blessed New Year. May you experience God in this year like seldom before. His closeness, the intimacy with God that draws you into His presence. January 1, first day of a new year. First Sunday in a new year. In the last 6-7 hours, sermons to the text that I have selected for today have been preached in hundreds of churches. 6-7 years ago, or 6-7 hours ago, not years. Where? All across Germanic-speaking Europe. In Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Many of the evangelical churches take the Bible verse of the year as their verse. Let's look at it. Du bist ein Gott, der mich sieht. You understand that? 1. Mose 16, Vers 13. You can find it there. Okay, let's have it in English. You are the God who sees me. Do you see the cultural sensitivity of our office staff? For Saskatoon, for Saskatchewan, they've got snowflakes. And in Germany, as they talk about it, and as our son sent a little picture this morning, he is out in his backyard enjoying his coffee out there. And so that was a desert scene that they had in Germany, Austria. Way back in the 1700s, Moravian Brethren, a renewal movement, started printing a devotional for morning and evening, Bible verses, similar to Our Daily Bread. And out of that grew a desire, let's have one Bible verse for the year. A thought that will focus our attention for that year. To get that information out to the churches and out to the people and have it printed and to have pictures drawn and give time for preachers to prepare a sermon. They would pick the verse out of a pot of selected Bible verses, praying and say, God, direct us to the verse, to the phrase that will be appropriate for that year. So in 1930, the verse that they picked was a counterstatement, turned out to be a counterstatement to National Socialism or Nazism in Germany. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. This verse that we have for 2023, you are the God who sees me, was selected 4 years ago. That's before the war in Ukraine started. Many of us would never have dreamt that 2022 would be what it was. It was before the ongoing refugee crisis, famine in Somalia. And it was before where you are right now. Your story. Your story of pain. Your story with the things that you are facing. This statement is part of a larger narrative. And this morning, with some very broad strokes, just with a real big, wide paintbrush, I want to paint the story background. And then we want to sort of look at the story itself, and then we're going to zoom in and say, what is this really about? I want to conclude with several stories that will highlight this verse. First of all, the big picture. Genesis chapter 12 to 15. Big picture, big strokes. The first one is, go west, young man, go west. Okay, this is going west, adventure, excitement. Story of Abram. He was about 70 years old. Now, I sort of thought, Andrew called up the girls like that were between 12 and 19 to stand up when he preached the sermon on Mary. How about the guys that are 70 years and older stand up with me? I'm there, okay? All you guys that are 70 and older. Okay. Thank you guys for your solidarity. Okay, the message comes from God. It's time to pull up stakes. There's a new life ahead. Go west. Claim God's promise. I'm giving you a new land for you and your descendants. So Abraham and his wife Sarah, and nephew Lot, they travel out to Haran, which is in Syria. And then the next stroke that I paint on the picture is when things go south. So Abram was 75 now. God says, okay, leave Syria where you are, your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation. So Abram and his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot left Haran in modern Syria, traveled south along the Jordan River to Shechem, Morah, Bethel, and Negev. Adventure, obedience, trust. But then famine strikes, hunger gnaws, and you think, I cannot stay here. I'll go further south. And he went into Egypt. And Abram had a problem. Same problem I have. Wife looks pretty. Very pretty. And Abram was scared. He says, if I say she's my wife, they'll kill me and they'll take her. So he talked to his wife and he says, let's just say you're my sister. And way back on Grandma Online, they could have found out, yes, they were related. And so Sarah comes into the King Pharaoh's select harem of women. She's the beautiful one, the choicest one. And he just bestows lots of gifts on Abram. Thinks, wow, the greatest catch I made. And then things go rough for Pharaoh. and he realized, I've been lied to. And he talks to Abraham and he says, you cheated me. You lied to me. And Abram admits it. And Pharaoh sends him off and says, here, you take all this cattle, all these sheep and goats, and here I give you a bunch of slaves, girl slaves and boy slaves. You take them and get out of here. The next is in search of the true north. I believe Abram was waiting deep inside and thought, okay, God, I've got to get my act together again. I'm going to find my true north. I'm going to come back to my relationship with you. And he goes physically north, but also figuratively. He takes his losses and separates from Lot and says, I will take the hill country. You take the valley. He goes the second mile and he rescues Lot when he is being pursued by enemy kings. He confesses his loyalty to God in chapter 14:22. To the Lord, the Most High, creator of heaven and earth. Chapter 15. God approaches Abraham and says, Abram, let's start all over again. I'm going to make a covenant with you. I am making a pact. I am going to put it on the line. I am committing myself totally to you. And I believe Abraham responded, yes, God, I'm in. It's all or nothing. I'm with you. That's the broad strokes. That's the background of the picture. Now let's come to the picture itself. The Bible text, you can follow along in Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, the Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. And Abram agreed with Sarah's proposal. So Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, the Egyptian servant, and gave her to Abram as a wife. This happened 10 years after Abram had settled in the land of Canaan. So Abram had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. But then when Hagar knew that she was pregnant, she began to treat her mistress, Sarah, with contempt. Then Sarah said to Abraham, this is all your fault. I put my servant into your arms, but now that she's pregnant, she treats me with contempt. The Lord will show who's wrong, you or me. And Abram replied, look, she is your servant, so deal with her as you see fit. Then Sarah treated Hagar so harshly that she finally ran away. The angel of the Lord found Hagar beside a stream of water in the wilderness, along the road to Shur. The angel said to her, Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from, and where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress, she replied. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. Then she added, I will give you more descendants than you can count. And the angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears. For the Lord has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord, who had spoken to her. She said, "You are the God who sees me." She also said, "Have I truly seen the one who sees me?" The picture itself. First of all, a picture of desperation. Do you know what desperation does? It often leads us to very dumb decisions. Stupid things when we get our back up against the wall. Abraham and Sarah didn't have children. Well, okay, at 85, the biological clock was ticking. Well, it had never ticked for Sarah. She recognized it's hopeless. It is desperately hopeless. This ain't going to work. We need to try plan B. I've got a slave girl, a young gal. She does exactly like I say. Abram, you take her to the bedroom. You sleep with her and get her pregnant, and we'll have our boy. God's promise will come this way. And it happened, just like that. Hagar got pregnant. But the table turned. Now Hagar, she was in the leading role. And she had contempt, disdain for her lady that she was serving, for Sarah. Sarah gets upset, and we have the blame game, and things get ugly. Sarah confronts Abraham and says, "You know, it's your fault. You got this girl pregnant, and now she is looking at me like she's dirty, she's mean, and I'm your wife. Like, this ain't right." And he says, "Well, I just did what you told me to do. You're wrong." And they fight it out. And finally, Abraham's had enough and says, he just sort of like, "Okay, hands off, I surrender. You do with her whatever you want to do. She's yours." And so Sarah turned mean and ugly to this servant girl. And Hagar ran away. From hopelessness to hope. Hagar saw no glimmer of hope. The only way left for her was to run away into a desert and hope to die. She found some water, prolonged her life. But also an angel, or in some translations it says the Lord. And some feel it refers to Jesus himself in his pre-incarnation form, came with a question. "Hagar, Sarah's servant, where have you come from and where are you going?" In the conversation that follows, Hagar recognized, "You are the God who sees me." There is hope. Let's look at the picture in more detail. Zoom in. Who is this Hagar? She's a woman, an Egyptian slave girl. Perhaps she's the daughter of Pharaoh himself. when I read Genesis 12, verse 17. Not only did she have the burden that Eve has placed upon women in this world, you will have a desire towards a man, but he will rule over you. She carried that. She also carried the burden of being a slave. No right to speak up and to say what she wanted. She was a foreigner. She was a used and abused woman. She was used as an instrument to fulfill Abram's and Sarah's hope of a child. And she was abused in that she had no say in the matter. The stronger, Abram and Sarah, were using the weaker, Hagar, to meet their wishes, their pleasures, and their satisfaction. But the Lord, an angel comes. Interesting, the angel knew Hagar's name, knew her identity. You are Sarah's servant maid. But he asks a question. Where are you coming from? And where are you going? I believe the angel knew the answer to those questions. But the angel, the Lord, wanted Sarah or Hagar to reflect, to enter into her own story. Hagar, you can't run away from it. Come on, Hagar, face your pain, face your story. And she was told the path forward is going to be back into your pain, but this time with God. God is going with you. You will have a son. You will name him Ishmael, which means God hears. It will be a constant reminder to you every time you say his name. Oh, he'll be a wild one. He'll be a tough one. Some of you had some of those kids, right? It's going to be like a wild donkey. But God's got great plans for him. He will become a father of nations. Hagar is the very first person to dare to give God a name. In Hebrew, El Roi. You are the God who sees me. You know every detail in my life. It's not a pretty story, but you call me out to enter my pain, to face my story, to see it all the way it is, and you will transform my hopelessness into a hope with future generations. You are the God who sees me. Everything. And it's warm and it's comforting. God knows. Now you say, that's back hundreds of years ago. But I believe that truth still holds. And I want to highlight it with two stories. So during this past week, I listened to some audiobooks. I find that I love listening to books, especially if I'm working out in the gym or going for a walk. It's easier than reading. The first podcast is Chuck Swindoll, still alive, 88 years old, former president of the Dallas Theological Seminary, author of over 70 books. Being interviewed by his youngest daughter. The link is actually included on the website or on an email that you got on Friday. It's somewhere there. You just have to look around, and I encourage you to listen to the podcast yourself. So here's the daughter interviewing her 88-year-old dad, talking about his life going through his childhood. Chuck says, "As a kid, I was tolerated, but I was told very clearly, you were never wanted. You're a mistake." The world revolved around his older brother and older sister. He says, "At best, I can remember 6 conversations that had any meaning at all with my parents. 6 times that they would engage with him in 20 years. His birthday was not celebrated until he got married, and his wife baked him his very first birthday cake. He stuttered and had little sense of self-worth. But then he added, but don't get me wrong, like I was never beaten. There's no bruises on my body." And his daughter says to him, "But Dad, you were neglected. You were neglected." But Chuck would say there were angels, there were people in his life who helped him face his story. I won't give you those other details. You can listen to that podcast yourself. But Chuck would affirm, "You are the God who sees me. Mom and Dad didn't see me, but God, you saw me. You sent a drama teacher in high school to me and says, look, I want you, by the time you graduate, take a leading role in the drama." Charles responded, says, "I can't, I stutter." And the drama teacher says, "We'll work on that this summer. We'll get you to speak." The second story that I tell you is also from a man who is still alive, Wilhelm Bunz. I've also included a link. It's going to be tougher for some of you. But for some of you, it's going to be easy. It's going to be just, wow, this is a piece of cake. Because the link is in German. Okay? But you can try it. And if nothing else, you wait until Pastor James gets back. And you sit down, you invite him out for coffee. And he'll tell you, he'll translate for you. Wilhelm Bunz was born in 1954 in Germany. His mother birthed him, but she refused to feed, to diaper, or to hold him. A 4-year-old sister that he had at that time assumed this role as best she could. And so he cried and cried. And it was too much for his mother, who picked him up and carried him outside and placed him in a ditch beside a road, hoping that he would die. Someone walked by, found him, and brought him to a hospital. He was later returned to his father. His mom had already left the family, and the father tried. No, he didn't try to raise him. The father ignored him. When he entered school, the teacher asked each of the students, "What do you want to become?" And Willie answered, "A gangster." And so he would cut off the girls' braids, and he would fight the boys. And he got the nickname Bloodbath Willie, because wherever Willie was, there was blood. He was moved from one juvenile delinquent home to another. By 16, he was responsible for the death of a policeman. He was driving a stolen vehicle, caused an accident, caused the death of one policeman and permanent life injuries, handicap to another policeman. After another 2 murders, numerous robberies, and other crimes, for a total of 148 charges, he was finally arrested. The police caught up with him, and he was placed in front of a judge. 100 witnesses testified of damages, things that they lived, the horror they experienced. And the last person the judge called up was his own father. And the judge says, look, we have heard so much evil, so much wrong. There's got to be something good. There's something good in your son Willie. And the father says, no, there's no good. There's not any good, period, in Willie. In fact, the father said, what would be best is if you would reinstitute the death penalty and use the death penalty for Willie. Father says it's been a living hell with this boy every day. Willie ended up in jail, even though many of these charges against him could not be proven. Let me backtrack one. Willie saw a chaplain that came to the prison, and he noticed he had a book, and he was fascinated by the paper. Like, it's just nice and thin. And he thought, that would be great for smoking. So he asked for a Bible, and they gave him just a small little New Testament, a Gideon's one. He said, no, I don't want just a small little piece like that. I want a real thing, the big book. So they gave him one, and he started at the front. Genesis chapter 1. He ripped out the page, and then he thought, well, before I smoke it, I should read it. So he read it, one side, the other side. Folded in half again, had 4 pieces, took his tobacco, rolled it up into this paper, and smoked. And so he worked through the Bible. 7 years, reading, tearing, smoking. He came to the New Testament, Matthew chapter 5, what we call the Beatitude, blessed. And he read about people being blessed and a blessing to others. And he says, that's not me. I'm cursed, and I'm a curse to many people. And then he read, you are the salt of the earth. And he wondered, what would it be like to be salt for people? He says, this is impossible. So he challenged God. He says, God, if this is true, I challenge you to change me. I challenge you to make me salt. And that people, instead of cursing me, that they may bless me. And God started that process. Willie one day says, I need to confess my sins to the judge. I need to write him a letter which of these 148 charges are actually true and which ones aren't. There were very few that weren't. And so he wrote the letter, placed it in an envelope, and plopped it in the mailbox. And the fear that came into his life, oh no, now the book is really going to be thrown at me. And he found a coat hanger and he tried to fish it out, but he couldn't. The judge was a Christian. Actually worked it that Willie got out of jail earlier than what he had been sentenced to. And Willie decided, I am going to come clean, and I am going to visit the people who are still alive and apologize. And he goes through the stories of meeting these people. He visits the widow of the policeman. And he asks, do you have children here? Yes, I have 5 children. He says, bring them together. I'll come again in the evening. And then he identifies himself. I am that young 16-year-old guy that is responsible for your husband's death or for your father's death. The widow opens her arms and runs to Willie and embraces him and says, my husband was a believer. He loved Jesus. And every day since that accident, I've been praying for you that you would know Jesus too. And so Willie would also say, you are the God who sees me. One last story. Your story. Your pain. I don't know you or your story, but I dare say you have a story. We all have a story. Now, please, whatever you do, do not compare your story with somebody else's story. Oh, mine was worse or mine was not as bad. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says, if you compare yourself with other people, you're ignorant. Like, that is really dumb. Like, if one thing is really stupid for 2023 is to compare yourself to others. Okay? Just don't go there. So let's just stay with you and with me. Each of us has a story, and we're called upon to face our story. I want to make an unpaid advertisement right here for Freedom Sessions. I'm part of that. I'm facing my story. And when you are ready to face your story, I can highly recommend Freedom Sessions to you. There have been times where we have been hurt. Emotional, physical, spiritual scars. There are times where we have hurt, where we have wounded other people. Perhaps not intentionally, but we know we have hurt others. Maybe it was simply survival or desperation. But then there are other things in our story There are things in the closet of our mind. And there is that deep, deep hope. Closet door, stay closed. Closet door, don't dare let that stuff out that's in there. Someday I'll die, and I'll take that closet stuff with me into the grave. I believe the angel was inviting Hagar. Come. Face your pain. I'm going to send you back to Abram and to Sarah. But this time, I will be with you. I will help you. There is shame with pain that we carry, guilt, anger, trying to find ways to self-protect. There is denial, minimizing, rationalizing, hostility, or spiritualizing. But we found out it doesn't really help. We try to bury the story. We kill our emotions. All in an attempt to run from our pain. I don't know what your plans are for 2023. Whether you've set some dreams for this year, made some New Year's resolutions already. But if you haven't thought of anything, I'm going to give you an idea this morning. Take the words of Hagar. You are the God who sees me. And invite God to, since you see it all, I want to go back into my story. You know every detail of my life. It's not a pretty story. But you call me out to enter my pain, to face my hopelessness, and turn it into hope. May these words of Hagar resonate in your heart and mind. May they not only become the words of the year, but the words of your life. But you are the God who sees me. Let's stand up. I want to pray. Father in heaven, you know every detail of my life and every detail of every person sitting here. But you know it, and you want to redeem this life, this story. You want to bring good out of it. Because you are a God who sees and knows it all. And you want to draw very close to us. And so, Father, I pray that through Jesus Christ, who showed his love to us as people, and through the Holy Spirit, who comes and speaks to us personally, individually, comforts, but also convicts. May we invite you, triune God, into this year and this year into my life, the life of every person here today or watching who would open their life, their story to you. We thank you that you are here for each of us.